Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. And once again, you're going to get stereo Richards or bilateral Richards, because joining me now is my regular guest. I always look forward to our conversations, Richard Wolff, as you almost certainly know, is an economist, an economic historian. He's the host of Economic Update on Free Speech TV, and he is a professor at a bunch of places. And his latest book is The Sickness is the System. It's a collection of essays and thoughts about the COVID pandemic. He joins us once again. So first of all, Richard Wolff, as always, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much, RJ. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. And as always, one of the things I enjoy about our conversations is that it's taking a big picture look at what we mean when we talk about the economy, society, and we've been given in our political culture a very limited set of lenses through which to view these things. In other words, a very sort of historically anomalous ideology of pro-capitalism, so-called free market, and so on, has blinkered us, I think, in many ways to a full examination of the world around us. And so one of the refreshing things about our conversations is that we do get the opportunity from time to time to sort of re-examine our social assumptions. And one of the things that gets talked about a lot, but I think without a full depth of understanding, is consumerism. I think a lot of people, not only on the left, but certainly on the left, know that we live in what would be described as a highly consumerist culture. The acquisition of things, of objects, of status symbols, signifiers, you name it, is a big deal in our society. I mean, even the conservative humorist Stan Freberg did a whole routine about green Christmas, about the commercialization of Christmas from the point of view of a dedicated Christian, and as I say, conservative. So, I mean, I think that's understood that perhaps we value things over human values to a certain extent. But I also think there's a misunderstanding of what some of those lenses we haven't been allowed to look through, might tell us. You know, if we talk about socialism, socialist thought, Marxist thought, that I think, if anything, if people get to the stage in the conversation where they even understand there's a different point of view like that, I think sometimes they think they have a very shallow view of what Marxist or socialist thought might say about consumerism too. And I have a feeling it's more subtle than that, but I could be wrong, of course. But I mean, just first of all, at a 50,000 foot level, what's your take on what might be called a Marxist view of consumerism?
Good. Let me respond. There is a literature about this. Marxists have worried about it, done research, debated it. There's a literature there. International. It's happened in many countries. I would answer it in the following way. Capitalism as a system, as we all know, is driven by profit. The goal of people who set up an enterprise is to make it pay. Profit is the bottom line. Profit is what we're after. We're in the business to make money. There's 1,000 ways of saying it, and we know from what we all understand about the system that it's profit-driven. A company that makes profit is considered successful. A company that doesn't is considered unsuccessful. Executives are promoted if their business is profitable, demoted if it isn't. I mean, all the signs are there. We really don't need much additional argument. But it's a little more subtle, as you rightly say, when it comes to consumers. And for me, consumerism, the ism at the end of the word, has really to do with the idea, which is not natural, is not born with people, but has to be cultivated and developed, the idea that you will be happy in relation to the number of objects you are able to consume. that the level of your consumption, the range of your consumption, these are the goals of society. These are the goals of the human race. And in my judgment, that is a 100% capitalist idea. And we can begin by noticing that to make the source of human happiness objects, and to make most of us dependent on wages we get, means that we are basically being taught that the appropriate thing for us to do with our wages is to go and buy things, because buy things make you happy. Buy things satisfy. Buying things that you can then consume are what life is about. So that, there are jokes. If the going gets tough, the tough go shopping. If you're not feeling real well, go down to the mall. It'll be where you feel better. Now let's look at that for a minute. To buy things means you're going to make profit for whoever sells those things. The people who sell things have a vested interest in associating in your mind buying whatever they sell with your own personal happiness, because you'll be more likely to spend your money on it. In other words, the consumerism is in part a response to advertising, to the fact that we are relentlessly told in very sophisticated ways that our personal development, our adequacy, our attractiveness to other people, all of that depends on buying something. Every ad associates the thing you are supposed to buy with some happiness, some pleasure, something good that you will acquire through the act of buying and therefore profiting someone else. The second way Marxists have looked at it is by saying that in capitalism, the way every enterprise is organized is that there's a tiny group of people at the top who make all the decisions. They decide what commodities will be produced. They decide what technology will be used. They organize the factory, the office, or the store's layout, which is governing where you sit or stand, what your lighting will be, what the quality of your air will be. And then at the end of the production process, after you've contributed your brains and your muscles, the decision of what is done with the product of your labor is not in your hands. It belongs to the same employer who decided what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and all the rest. This means that in capitalism, employees, the vast majority of the people who work in any enterprise, are excluded from all kinds of decisions. They have to live with the results. So, for example, if part of the job you have might allow you to have interesting conversations with the people who work around you, developing friendships that teach them about your life and you about their life, the employer has no interest in your personal development. He doesn't want you to take time out to chit-chat with your fellow workers, and he will organize the workplace so that you can't do it. He will hire supervisors to prevent you from doing it. Why? Because he thinks it enhances profit, and he's in the position to do it, to force it on you. And so there is in most workers, whether they're conscious of it or not, the Marxist argument goes, there is in workers a resentment, a bitterness, a sense of being ripped off. And the problem for capitalism has always been, if you're making the majority of people in every workplace feel like that, you are creating the risk that they will stop working, that they will change the workplace. And so how do you deflect the very bitterness your system creates? Answer: convince the working class that what will compensate it for the bad qualities of the job are the things you can do when the job is over. I like to use the example of the neighborhood bar. On your way home from the office, the factory, or the store, you pass the bar, and in the windows of the bar is a big sign, happy hour. That's all the sign says. And it says an encyclopedia, because that sign reflects how we all feel about the hours we just spent in the factory, the office, or the store. They're not happy. And we want to compensate ourselves. We want to reward ourselves. We want to offset the feeling of being ripped off, which we were, by drinking too much, or if we are against alcohol, go to the mall, shop till you drop. It's the logic. This notion of consumption has produced, 1 million popular songs, 1 million folk songs, in which the singer laments, I bought this, it didn't make me happy. I bought 2 of them, it didn't make me twice as happy. And the discovery of many people, often late in life, that what really matters is the people who love you, the people that are close to you, the people who build you, who develop you by their own way of looking at the world, that they teach you about, and you them, that the relationships are what make a life. But the problem is relationships are good for you, but they're not profitable for people who sell things. So they got to wean you away from the feelings of life, from the relationships, from the connections you have with other people, and make you feel actually even more alone as you cut off the conversation, you end the telephone call because you got to get in your car and drive to the mall and buy 3 more things that will stay in the boxes that you pile up in your garage.
I knew a guy in California who was very successful in business, importing business. He was Italian or something. And he went out and he bought a Bentley or one of those cars. And he said, I was happy for a week. And this is a guy at the apex, right? This is a guy, at the very top. The Edward Arlington Robinson, the poet, wrote that poem, Richard Cory, about, the rich kid, the factory boss's son who kills himself. So on one level, and Paul Simon made a folk song out of it, but on one level we get it, and yet on another level I think we don't, or it's so deeply inculcated. And that's sort of what I was hinting at in my introduction. Karl Marx said religion is the opiate of the masses. I think now the historical difference the 20th century made is that now probably more than religion, even an opiate of the masses. And you have, Adam Curtis, the British filmmaker, made that, what I thought was a terrific film, The Century of the Self, about advertising and how it was used to stoke all of this and then spun into political propaganda. But to me, this is a fundamental obstacle to real change and a fundamental tool of enslavement. I mean, you go to certain poor white or black or brown communities, not everywhere. I don't stereotype any group of people, but from time to time you'll find like a very poor home and a fancy car in the driveway or something like that. I mean, you see this is almost like a, opiate is the right word. There's enough of it in there to diffuse the impulse to say, this is unlivable, this is unacceptable, human beings shouldn't have to exist in this degraded form. And it seems to me, and people got annoyed, and I get it when you say that, because it's like, who are you to judge other people? So we get into this whole circular kind of argument about it. I don't know how to break the chain, but I first of all, do you agree with my interpretation that there is such a kind of cycle of you making it difficult to talk about this, much less energize people towards action?
Absolutely. I think, that's what advertising does. It makes us judge ourselves. Maybe that's the worst thing, not even judge others. But what about yourself? How many people are driven to God knows what kinds of pain and suffering because they don't have this, because they compare themselves with the Joneses across the street who have that, who have to face their child, who wants for Christmas what his friend in school got, but you can't afford it. The notion of you as inadequate, as a lover, as a friend, as a parent, because the relentlessness of advertising, the fact that you cannot drive down any street in this country, walk through any town, enter any public event or means of transportation without being assaulted on every side by an image of what you should go out and buy. By comparison, think about how many ads you've ever seen that urge you to go for a walk with a friend. Find a nice rural area and spend an afternoon walking down a country road, talking about whatever is on your mind. You don't see an occasional good movie, absolutely. An occasional poem, a song. Yes, there are people who see it, but there's no comparison between the relentless use of money to advertise compared to money for anything else in our culture. Advertising is the public art of our culture. You want real art, you got to go to a museum or go to an expensive theater or go to an expensive opera. Yeah, you can still find it, but it will cost you a lot of money, and there's very little advertising for it. The advertising is for what makes money. So besides the specific, there's this constant reinforcement of the notion that money making is the be all, the end all, the goal, the solution to your, if only I could get a better paying job, I could buy a bigger car, a better car, a newer car. Oh, it never stops. It's like an addiction, because when you feed it, you need more, and then you need more, and then you need more until eventually it kills you because your body or your mind can't stand it. I think you also see it. In every generation, there are creative, interesting young people who choose to opt out. They are not going to be driven. And so they decide to raise organic turnips in New Hampshire. Oh, okay. Wouldn't be my choice, but I understand there is a visceral sense. Those young people have seen how consumerism consumed their own parents, their own family, and they're reacting against it because they know how they suffered as young people from the attention they didn't get because parents were driven, often saying it was for their children, to do something their children wished they had never done.
There was an old funk music song by Parliament Funkadelic called Funky Dollar Bill. This must be 1970s. And the line in it was, "You don't buy a life, you live a life. My father found out much too late." So yes, there are always these people like George Clinton, the master of funk music, who figure this out in each generation, but it's exceptional. It's almost deviant from a sociological perspective. And to me, the sort of the hook inside the bait of this consumerism, the one that gets you and enslaves you in a way, is debt. That the post-war, for those who benefited, those groups that benefited from the post-World War II economic boom, primarily white and so on, working class, they lived a life that is, this is my interpretation, correct me if you disagree, but that was gradually, the ability to do that was taken away from them by increasing inequality, I guess at the end of the 1960s. But for a while, one adult could be the wage earner for a family of four. They could eventually buy a car. I think I was 8 when my parents bought their first used car. They could eventually buy a TV. I think I was 6. They could do these things. But eventually it required both adults to work, if it was a 2-adult household, and increasing levels of debt. And it almost seems that debt was both the escape valve to encourage people to think they still could live that middle class lifestyle, and the enslaving mechanism that forced them to continue to exist in that world. And to me, that debt and consumerism go hand in hand as a kind of insidious tool of sucking you into the machine. But that's my take.
No, the economics is impeccable. Real wages stopped rising in the 1970s and 80s. Before that, real wages had risen every decade. And so workers could afford to buy more. When that stopped, the only way they could hold on to the notion that there's an American dream of having bigger and better and more stuff by borrowing. So that just like an addict. So now you're not only upset because your wages aren't good enough, but you're upset because you know you can't pay off these debts. And you're hounded by anxiety about your level of debt. If you miss a payment, you start being attacked by the debt collectors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's an awful, awful experience. But I would like to stress one thing. If workers in America understood that they are denied their democratic rights when they go to work, that in the workplace they are told what to do, when to do, how to do, where to be, and when the employer has no more use from you, you're fired, you're gone. This is abusive, autocratic. This has nothing to do with democracy, has nothing to do with honesty and with good dealings with other people. It's awful. And if workers understood that they'd be a lot happier if the workplace were organized differently, then they wouldn't seek solace by consumerism. They would seek solace by banding together in unions or other worker collective organizations and confronting the employers with the reality, we, the employees, are the majority. You're not going to treat us this way. You're not going to abuse us as human beings and then tell us, shut up and go to the mall. That's the only way you can offset what we do to you on the job. That's what holds capitalism together. If that gets loosened, if workers really understood how much of their tension, how much of their unhappiness has to do with how they're treated on the job, then they would not be fobbed off by having another fancier car. It lasts about a week, and then it's just a car, and you're just as unhappy as you were the week before you bought the car.
And you got to make the car payments now.
Yes.
So the other piece of this, and that may tie in, Richard Wolff, is, and in this sense, Marx did link religion or religiosity of a kind and something related to consumerism. I think it's related, which is this concept of commodity fetishism, which has been expanded upon considerably by others as well. But fetishism, people may think of, sexual proclivities, foot fetishists or whatever, but it actually is a religious term describing certain types of religions that ascribe mystical qualities to physical objects. Might be a statue, might be a sacred spring or a river or something, but fetish objects as objects of worship. And I think, but my understanding is primitive here, but I think to me, one of the ways that hoodwinks people is that the bosses, as you mentioned earlier, the ones who are ripping people off in the workplace, they've somehow managed to convince everyone that what they bring with their capital, with their patents, with their copyrights and so on, is that an iPhone, for example, is not just the product of engineers working for Apple and laborers working in the Foxconn factories in China and shippers and truck drivers that bring it to your town, that there's a mystical extra zip to it, quality to it that, the magic of Steve Jobs or whomever brought to it. And therefore it becomes a fetish object. There's that magical capitalist thing in it that somehow workers don't have. And therefore you need to work for these guys who know the secrets of the temple, to in order to pay for the things that only they know how to imbue with this magic. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely. I would expand it even further the way I read Marx. When he says fetish of commodity, I think it would be better understood as fetish of the market. He loved this idea that to this day, politicians will say things like, let the market decide, or the market says we should do this, or we should free the market because the outcome in the market is the one that's most efficient or most reflects what people want. He loved that because that's fetishism. The markets are a human institution. For example, dogs don't have one. We have them. Markets is a human institution. And unless you are very religious, you understand that all human institutions come and go. They have strengths and they have weaknesses. And there's nothing absolutely good about any one of those that we have long ago gotten rid of, like sacrificing our children or killing animals and believing that that does something for some God somewhere who wants you to do that. We've gotten rid of a lot of institutions because we were sane about them. The attempt to suggest that the market is some magic, that's the fetishism. The fetishism of the market, where, of course, commodities are bought and sold. And he wanted people to understand that's a particular institution. It serves a particular group of people to sustain a particular system that serves them. And you are a fool as well as a dupe if you imagine to take seriously the BS those people give out, or that, oh no, this is not just a good institution for us, it is the best for the whole world. That person is trying to sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. Never forget, in the terms of markets and commodities, the people who do the best in a market are the people with the most money. The people who get whatever is scarce are the people who can afford to pay the high price for the scarce item. Markets favor the rich. That's why they like it, and that's why they invented the idea that we should all bow down to the market, because that's very convenient for them.
Is there, we always seem to come back to this, or I always seem to do in our conversations, Richard Wolff, but these are hard ideas to get across to people when they're just trying to make a buck. They're trying to stay above water. They're, and they're being presented with a series of political choices that are basically, we propitiate the God in this way, or we propitiate the God in a slightly different way, but the God is the God. And by the way, I wrote a piece after the crash of 2008. The free market God is angry with his followers, but it's never the acolytes' fault, right? It's always, and the God is never angry at them. He's angry at you for not listening to them. So how do you get, this was a mission of the left in the United States in the 1930s, right? I mean, you had, who was it, Gus Hall saying communism was 20th century Americanism. Say what you will about Gus Hall, but I think that was quite a catchy phrase. But we or you had the Grapes of Wrath, right? Which I thought was the great folksy presentation of socialist ideals. Nowadays, I don't think the left knows how to speak to working people about this stuff in a way that resonates. What do you think?
No, I feel the same way. I feel we're waiting for the next wave of culturally sensitive artists, basically, who can take a look at late capitalism in its declining period and come up with the poetry and the music to talk to people about all of that. I do think people are open to it. That's my experience all my life. I remember once going to a African-American church in New Haven, Connecticut, and a woman pastor was giving the sermon. And she began her sermon by saying, a lot of you divide the world into the haves and the have-nots. But I want you to know, she said, that the biggest problem is not with the haves and not with the have-nots. It's with the people we should call the think they haves.
Right.
That's brilliant. She captured in that moment, she understood she's got to deal. She's a minister, so she has her agenda, but she has to deal with the people who are trapped, who think they have and suffer, as she went on to explain. And, it moved her. By the way, it moved the parish. There were 200 people in that church, and you could see they were nodding and saying the amens as she was developing this idea. But, it taught me a very powerful lesson, and I always give her credit because she's the one who taught it to me.
Martin Luther King Jr. was, described himself as saying that democratic socialism was the closest probably to his worldview. We've had on this show a couple times the head minister of the historic African Methodist Church here in Washington, D.C., because he wrote a piece about how capitalism is a virus that, I thought, I got to talk to this guy, I got to get to know this guy. So you're right. I think part of that is that language. And part of it, I suppose, is just staying open to, I guess, not losing faith in the ability of people to get it. To me, one of the big failings of the so-called left, or, liberal America, whatever you want to call it, is a lack of faith in the ability of people to understand the truth when it's presented to them. Whatever flaws the Bernie candidacy had, and I was, of course, very close to it, very much part of it, first time around, people got it. People instinctively got it, and they knew he wasn't BSing them. They knew he wasn't playing games.
No, he gave the lie to the people who said he couldn't get any following. He showed that millions of Americans, after 70 years of Cold War propaganda, would not be turned away because the man was a socialist. I mean, it's an amazing statement to what people held on to as reasonable and possible. Propaganda blitz that lasted their entire lives that they came through, and they still understood that whether that was socialism or not, who cared? That made more sense than what the blather is that comes out of the other.
So we shall see. But to me, I've been accused of being an old hippie because, I think that consumerism is enslaving us. And yes, I have an iPhone, okay. But how odd he thinks about these things and yet exists in contemporary society. So that's the other piece of it, right? These accusations of hypocrisy are so absurd.
And I get into airplane. I excoriate the airlines. I just thought their performance over the 4th of July was enough that any reasonable person would nationalize an industry that behaved so irresponsibly. But no. I still get in airplanes because I have to travel, and that's the best way for me to function in this society. The trains would do me another kind of service, and the buses, well, that's beyond words anyway. So, yes, I do have to live in this society, but I don't apologize for that. I live in it, helps me understand why and how badly it needs to be changed.
And that's our next conversation. This whole notion that addressing these societal problems is a matter of individual virtue,
right,
rather than collective action. Whether it's the environment, did you recycle as opposed to, and I'm all for recycling, as opposed to, did you work to bring down the corporations that are destroying the planet? So. With that, we'll call it an end for now. But Richard Wolff, host of Economic Update on Free Speech TV, and historian and economic historian and economist, is always a great pleasure speaking with you. And as always, thank you for coming on the program.
My pleasure, RJ. These are remarkable conversations, and I'm very, very glad to participate.
Thank you. And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.